Okay, my name is Monica Gonzales, and today I am going to be doing my presentation on an analysis question that I came up with. How are hypodermic needles affecting Bernalillo County, New Mexico, and what can be done to alleviate the problem? Along the presentation, you will see pictures. These pictures I actually took myself of a site that myself and our behavioral health department went to that was reported to be a pretty big spot for drug use. I work for Bernalillo County's GIS department. So this is what kind of prompted me to look further into this problem. So first off, where is Bernalillo County? Bernalillo County is located in New Mexico. It is in central New Mexico, and it is surrounded by 5 other counties. If you look at the state of New Mexico inset, you can see that Bernalillo County looks quite small compared to the rest of the counties. But Bernalillo County is actually the most populous county in the state of New Mexico. Fun facts about Bernalillo County, it has the big I-40 that runs through it, as well as I-25, in which they cross paths. You will also see that the Rio Grande River, as well as historic Route 66, also run through Bernalillo County. A portion of it does so. Hypodermic needles in Bernalillo County are becoming quite a problem. There is a growing epidemic in Bernalillo County, and specifically drugs with needles. Needles have been reported to be found in playgrounds and parks, schools, parking lots, mostly abandoned homes and public restrooms, just to name a few. So the Bernalillo County Behavioral Health Department contacted my group, the Bernalillo County GIS Department, to help map areas of where they have found needles. These were very generic areas with cross streets, nothing. They didn't have specific addresses or specific areas. It was just real vague. So in doing this project for the Behavioral Health Department, news came out that an 11-year-old girl was pierced with a used needle at a Little League while she was practicing sliding bases. So this was almost a sign for us to make this project bigger than just mapping the needles that the Behavioral Health Department brought to us to map for them. So I know that Bernalillo County has limited resources. One of the only major programs that we have is the SHARP program, and that stands for Safe Handling and Routing of Paraphernalia program. This was implemented by the mayor, which allows drop boxes to be placed all around the city for safe needle disposal. Here's a map that you can see. These are the needle kiosks we have throughout the city. And part of this analysis will help show if we are placing them in the right areas or if they need to be moved. One of the problems with the hypodermic needle epidemic is that there are overlapping agencies. We have the city of Albuquerque as well as Bernalillo County agencies. We also have both behavioral health departments as well as public health departments and the Department of Health. So we have all these overlapping agencies, but we don't have any coordinating efforts that can allow one big program or one big plan to kind of help this problem. So with this analysis, I hope to help with coordinate the efforts as well as use the resources we have wisely. So to come forward, we will be seeing the methodology of what I did for my analysis, and I will share the results and conclusions as to what I came up with. So how can GIS solve this problem is the first question I asked. The first thing I thought of was to create a survey for the public of Bernalillo County to report discovered needles. Behavioral health departments, public health departments, these type of health departments can't do it alone. A lot of times we know of needles because the public has reported them. So that's the first thing I wanted to was create a survey. Then using other data, including the US Census Tract, also schools and park data to help with this analysis, because I want to emphasize this analysis on areas of vulnerable children as well as minority groups. So the public survey, I created this public survey. We went live with it in August of 2019. The reason why I use Survey 123 for ArcGIS is because it's user-friendly, it's fast, and it's simple, and we wanted something for the public to be able to use effectively and not have a hard time using it. The main reason why we use Survey 123 is because you're allowed a geopoint. You're allowed to add a geopoint. So this will give us an exact location of where needles are found, which will help tremendously in knowing our hotspots of these needles. In the back end, we did screen for duplicates, inappropriate submissions, and any blank surveys that came through to make sure it doesn't skew the data. From this, we were able to create a feature class with live data, but this specific analysis will be data from May 2018 up until this month of 2020. And with this data, we have 279 surveys submitted, allocating for over 19,000 needles that have been collected. So the reason why I chose vulnerable children is because we seem to see a lot of these needles come up in areas that children are most in. So schools and parks. I wanted to do schools because a lot of children walk to and from school. Same thing with parks. Children go to parks after school. They play sports at parks. And it's also a place for families to go to on the weekends and for events. So another reason why I chose parks is because people seeking shelter usually use it as a private and safe place because a lot of times there are closed park hours, and it's also dark and not obvious to law enforcement. So with the minority groups, I created a standard deviation map showing how spread out the non-white populations are housed in Bernalillo County, and I overlaid that with the needle submissions layer that was created from Survey 123. The minority groups I focused on were Hispanic, Black, and Asian communities. So the geospatial tools I used to help were the buffer tool as well as a select by location tool. The buffer tool, I used a half-mile, I created a half-mile buffer as well as a one-mile buffer for K-8 schools. Then I used I also did a half-mile buffer for city and county parks. I did half-mile just because there are a ton of parks and they're located near schools, neighborhoods. Pretty much, they're pretty easy access. So I used the select by location tool to grab the needle submissions that fall within the buffer of the school and parks to see how many of these needle submissions were within that buffer, so I can get the percentage of risk that children have walking to and from school or through parks for children and families. The standard deviation symbology was used in the minority population map, and you can see where a lot of our minority communities are placed in Bernalillo County. So for the schools, I did a 1-mile buffer because as I researched, I did see an article where parents say that they allow their children to walk, they will allow their children to walk no more than a mile to and from school. That was their safe distance for their children to walk. So I did this 1-mile buffer. The yellow dots you can see are all of the needle submissions that fall within those buffers. Because it seemed like a lot of needles, I went ahead and did a half-mile buffer. I cut that down in half to see how much of a difference it would bring that risk down. And as you can see, there's still a lot of needle submissions, but not as much as a 1-mile buffer. So for schools, I did a half-mile buffer, and I'm sorry, for parks, I did a half-mile buffer, and you can see the buffers bring up a lot of needle submissions as well. And that's because we do see that a lot of needles are found in parks because that's where a lot of people seeking shelter usually use that area to use drugs or to abuse drugs. We also have placed a lot of our needle kiosks in areas that are around parks or in parks to help with that safe disposal, but because children are around parks, we try to put it in areas that aren't totally accessible for children. And so here's my standard deviation minority population map. Here you can see a lot of the minority groups of Hispanic, Black, and Asian. You can see are in the southwest and northwest area. You can see some in the southeast area, and just looking at this map, you can see a high density of needles as well as the amount of needles that are in each needle submission. So at first glance, you can see that it's in an area in the southeast area, just south of I-40 and east of I-25. It looks like it can be in an area that is not with much of a minority group. But as you zoom in, this is a zoom in of that area. You can see that a lot of those needle submissions are coming from that very small area that are allocating for minority groups. Not only that, but you can see that some of these needle submissions are containing up to 1,000 needles found in one submission. So for the results with schools, on a 1 mile buffer, children at a 94% risk of coming in contact to needles. Because that is very high and is unacceptable, I did the half-mile buffer, and that shows a 38% risk, which drops dramatically, and 38% is still worrisome, but not like it would be for a 1 mile buffer. Parks, within a half-mile buffer, the same thing goes. 94% of people are at risk when walking within a half-mile of parks. As we saw in the standard deviation map, Hispanic, Black, and Asian communities do show a high risk of needle contact. So what can be done to alleviate the problem? I would suggest parents limit walking distance for their children to schools to only half a mile or less. Parks are considered danger zones in Bernalillo County, and I wouldn't advise that children be there alone because there is a high chance that children will come in contact with that or will see it and may be introduced to that. As far as a community, volunteer community pickup, that has already started, but we don't have enough people who are trained to do it or who know how to properly dispose of used needles. So that is something we can look for in training for the public. Also, city and county jobs that can be dedicated solely to picking up needles or to implement drug programs in the hotspot areas. And also the needle kiosks from the SHARP program, those need to also travel with the migration of drug use and make sure that these kiosks are being put in the right places, as well as there's enough there so that they don't get filled up too soon. And any questions? Thank you.